Hi everyone, I'm Ankur Desai. I'm the principal product manager for Amazon CodeWhisperer. Amazon CodeWhisperer is a machine learning coding companion that helps developers build applications faster. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about a few developer challenges. We'll introduce Amazon CodeWhisperer. We'll talk about the key use cases, and we'll look at a customer testimonial. And then we will end the webinar with a live demo. Now let's start with developer challenges, right? Uh, some of the key challenges developers face on a day-to-day basis are they have to manage writing code in multiple programming languages, right? So you may be a Java developer and your new project, maybe it is a little heavy on data processing, and that's why you have to use Python because there are the libraries available for data processing in Python. So that's one. And even if you stick to a single programming language, there are multiple frameworks and multiple libraries. For example, as a Python developer, you may be familiar with Django, but then your new project uses Flask, right? So now you have to pick up a new framework altogether. And on top of that, there are numerous cloud services and APIs. So across all of these combinations, then developers have to figure out the best practices, and then make sure that their code adheres to these best practices. As a result, developers spend a lot of time uh, searching for code snippets on the web and on developer forums, and then bringing back these code snippets to their IDE, where then they have to modify them, right? So all of this time that is spent for looking for what we call, many times boilerplate code, undifferentiated code, can be actually saved, and it can be put to a more creative task, or more important, solving more important business problems with the help of Amazon CodeWhisperer. So CodeWhisperer is a machine learning powered coding companion that provides code recommendations based on contextual information in your IDE, like your prior code and the comments you write. So on the right hand side of the screen, we see an example of CodeWhisperer here. Um, as you can see here, it can actually generate entire functions. So everything that is on the right-hand side of the cursor in light blue italics has been generated by CodeWhisperer based on a simple comment and the function name. Another key thing to call out is CodeWhisperer can generate entire functions based on simple English comments. So in this scenario, where we're saying, function to upload a file to S3, right? So instead of upload a file to S3, if you said store a file in S3 or push a file to S3, in all of those cases, CodeWhisperer will be able to understand the underlying intent, the English comment, and then generate the code. So we are not trying to actually create combinations of comments and respective outputs. It actually understands English at the offset, right? So that kind of differentiates this from other code completion tools. One key thing to mention here is when we say CodeWhisperer is ML powered, what that means is it is powered by a machine learning model that has been trained on billions of lines of code. It includes Amazon code as well as code that can be found in open source. So as a result, what has happened is the model has actually learned how to write code in programming languages like Python, Java, and JavaScript, similar to how a human being learns after years of practice, how to write code in Python, for example. So what happens here is, based on the model's understanding of English language and its ability to write code, when you bring both of them together, it can actually generate entirely new code, right? So it doesn't have to be code that the model has seen before. If you give it specific instructions, so based on its understanding of English and understanding of the particular programming language, it will generate entirely new code for you. Now, in a nutshell, this is how it works. Um, on the left-hand side, you have a developer that is writing code in their IDE. And Amazon CodeWhisperer actually is available as an extension for the most popular IDEs. So when you're writing the code, um, the CodeWhisperer extension is actually looking for um, instances or good places to automatically ask for recommendations. right? So as you're writing code, let's say there is a good place where the code whisperer extension thinks, it should automatically pop up next few lines of code. That request then is sent to the code whisperer service. Now, the service is powered by machine learning behind the scenes. So, what it actually takes into account is your code context, which is, let's say 15 to 20 lines of code prior to the cursor. And it will use that code context as an input to the model. And it will generate multiple recommendations for you to choose from. And these recommendations will then automatically appear in the developer's IDE. One key thing I would like to mention here is that uh, we do not use the developer's code to train the model. The model is already pre-trained. So what we use the code for, and it's not even the entire project or entire repository, we are only using the 15 to 20 lines of code. We are using it as an input to the model. So as soon as we generate the output, we don't have use for that input code anymore, right? So you can actually say, I don't want AWS to store any of my code snippets or even the resulting recommendations, right? And we will honor that request, and your code will, be completely private to you. Now let's take a look at the key capabilities of CodeWhisperer. Right, we have two important buckets here. The first one is developer productivity, and the second one is responsible AI, and both of them are equally important to us. Right, so in the first bucket, we have the productivity improvements, right, where we want to make sure that we support all popular programming languages. So as of now, CodeWhisperer supports Python, Java, and JavaScript, and we have plans to support C# and TypeScript sometime later this year. In terms of IDEs, CodeWhisperer is available as an extension to the JetBrains family of IDEs, and then VS Code, and then AWS's own IDEs in Cloud9 and the Lambda console. We're also working on supporting Visual Studio. The support is coming sometime later this year. The third key feature under developer productivity is first-class support for AWS APIs. Now, I mentioned the model has learned how to write code based on the fact that it has been trained on billions of lines of code that is available in the open source as well as Amazon code. So as a part of that process, the model has already learned how to write code for AWS APIs. But at the same time, we are actually making an extra effort here, right? So what we're doing is we are making a conscious effort to write the code snippets that we believe adhere to best practices when it comes to AWS APIs. And then we are feeding those snippets as training data to the model. So that makes sure that the model learns the best practices, and it generates the best possible code recommendations when it comes to AWS APIs. Now, the second key bucket here is responsible AI. And this is where we differentiate from other offerings in the market. For us, responsible AI is an important design principle, right? So when we make sure that we are giving developers the productivity boost with the help of AI, we also want to ensure that we are giving them the tools so that they can use this power of AI in a responsible manner. The first feature we have here is the reference tracker. Now, the reference tracker, what it does, it actually tracks the code recommendations that are generated by CodeWhisperer, and it makes sure that in the rare event that the generated code recommendation is you know uh, very similar, very close to an uniquely found code snippet in the training data, the developer is notified of the fact. Now, it has two implications. One, we want to make sure, because we are using open source code for training, we want to make sure that when the generated code, although it is generated, as completely new code, just like a human being will write a code, the model generates the code. But in some rare cases, if it is sufficiently similar to the underlying training data, we want to give developer the notice that, look, you may have to attribute it to the original author, right? That is the right thing to do in this scenario. The second thing is, sometimes the developer may not be comfortable with using code that may be under licensing implications, right? So if you look at a code snippet that has, I don't know, associated GPL license, then you might say, okay, I don't want to use it. So we are giving the the tool to the developer to decide whether they want to use any code that can be actually, that comes under a reference in the existing training data. The second key feature here is security scan. Now, once again, the code has been trained on billions of lines of, or the model has been trained on billions of lines of code. What that means is it might have learned certain unwanted patterns, and those patterns may surface in the code recommendations. So in this scenario, what we do is we give a simple button in the UI to the developer so that they can actually run a security scan right in their IDE. The purpose here is to find the most commonly known security issues so that we can flag to the developer that they have to fix these issues before committing the code. Now, these issues may occur because of code that is generated by CodeWhisperer, uh, or a developer may themselves write something that is not completely secure, or the combination of developer written code and CodeWhisperer generated code taken together may have a security issue, right? So that's where we want to actually make this functionality available, where whenever you're ready to commit your code, you simply run a security scan and see if there are any commonly known security vulnerabilities in your code. The third key feature here is bias avoidance, right? Now we know that the code itself may not be considered, or in some cases may have certain sensitive terms that, when taken together, can indicate bias. For example, if you're writing a function to decide whether to hire someone, right, and one of the conditions is based on gender, so we can say that, look, when these two terms come together, hiring and gender, um, the code may be biased towards a particular gender, and we don't want to surface that code to the developer at all. So what we do is we filter out such sensitive terms when they appear together, and make sure that we are not, showing any biased code to the developer. Let's talk about a few use cases where CodeWhisperer can help developers improve productivity. The first one is developing web applications, web and mobile applications, right? So developers can accelerate front end and back end development with the help of CodeWhisperer. As you're writing code in JavaScript or in Python or Java, it will start automatically giving you next 10 to 15 lines of code. And that should actually save you some time that you spend looking at code snippets on the web or in the developer forums. The second key use case is using machine learning in your applications, right? So if you want to, do data processing, let's say using something like pandas in Python, and then you have to build a model that actually predicts something. So all of that kind of code can be easily generated by CodeWhisperer, right? So that is another use case where CodeWhisperer can help you. The third one is building applications using AWS services. And of course, this goes, across the other use cases as well. But the idea here is, if you're using AWS services in your application, all you have to do is express your intent, and it should automatically then give you the corresponding code. And we will actually see um, a live example of the first use case and the third use case in our demo today. We will actually create a pandas data frame and manipulate it a little bit, and we'll also see how to generate code for AWS APIs. Um, and the fourth use case here is automating unit test generation, right? So nobody loves writing unit tests. What we can do is we can actually generate the unit tests based on a function you have written. And we'll also see this in the demo today, where we will write a function to manipulate a data frame, and then we'll generate the use case or the unit test to test that code. One thing I would like to reiterate is one of the key benefits of CodeWhisperer is that it makes it really easy to build applications on AWS. So all you have to do is, you have to express your intent in plain English, and it will generate the corresponding code for you. So in the example here on the screen, it is a continuation of the previous example, right? Here we are actually being a little more specific. We're saying we want to upload a file to S3, using server-side encryption. And as you can see, the code that is generated, it has generated the entire function for you, right? So you don't have to visit the AWS documentation, or in this case, the Boto3 documentation for Python. Uh, the entire function is generated within a few seconds, and it also takes into account that you said you want to use server-side encryption, right? So if you look at the arguments for the function upload file, it includes the server-side encryption argument. And we'll also see this in a live demo today. Yeah, before we move to the demo, this is a quote from one of our early adopters. We have spoken a lot about developer productivity in the presentation today. Um, but on a personal level, this is, I believe, this is a bigger um, benefit for developers where they can stay free of distractions, right? So it's one thing to say that, okay, I want to look up documentation and I just go to, let's say, Stack Overflow and quickly look at a code snippet, right? But a lot of times it actually includes a lot more distractions. You see something else that you like, or you were looking for a couple of days ago and now it's in front of you. So you start looking at other examples, and it takes a while before you come back to your IDE and complete your task. With CodeWhisperer, you stay focused in your IDE, right? You don't have to leave your IDE. That means, your code snippets are automatically being generated. You stay focused and get the task done much quicker than you would otherwise. And with that, let's move to the demo of CodeWhisperer. What we are going to do is we are going to look at the PyCharm IDE. This IDE is from JetBrains family. So this is PyCharm, and as you can see on the screen, I have already installed the CodeWhisperer extension or plugin. CodeWhisperer is available as a part of the AWS Toolkit plugin, right? So I have installed AWS Toolkit and I have enabled CodeWhisperer. Now, what we will do in today's demo is we will take a look at a few things. First, we will see how we can, create a generic function to manipulate or, process some data with pandas. Then we'll create a unit test, and then we will wrap up the productivity part with an example of uploading a file to S3, right? And then we'll switch gears to the responsible AI part, where we'll run a security scan and see whether it can find some commonly known issues. And also, then we will look at um, uh, how it can identify referenceable code, right? So if I accept something that may be under license, how it notifies me and trusts me to do the right thing by attributing it to the original author. So let's start with writing a function to upload to load a CSV file. So as you can see on the screen, it is, it doesn't only suggest code, but it is actually now guessing my intent. So based on the fact that I have imported pandas, it is now suggesting completion of the comment itself. It is guessing my intent and is saying, okay, if you're writing a function to load a CSV file, you're probably loading it into the pandas data frame, right? So with that, I am going to hit the tab key to accept the recommendation, and I'm going to hit enter. Upon hitting enter, it should continue generating code for me, right? So what it will do is, it will give me the function definition now, which I can accept or reject. But let's say that I'm still not ready to accept the function definition because I still want to provide more instructions before actually starting to write the code. So I'm going to say select columns, name, age, and address. And now let me hit enter. Now hitting enter, it should actually automatically generate the function signature for me. As you can see, the bottom right of the screen, it will tell me whether it is generating something. So um, let me manually trigger this. For some reason, it did not generate the code. Yeah, so it has generated the function definition for me. It looks good. It has more than one recommendation, so I can use my arrow keys to look at what it is suggesting. I like the first recommendation better. I'm going to hit the tab key, and when I hit enter, it should now automatically generate the rest of the code for me. So let me take a look at a couple of. There are 5 recommendations available to choose from. Uh, let's see. All of them are pretty similar except for some stylistic changes in how the comments are written. So let's say I like the fourth one the best because it matches how I would write a comment. And with that, you now have the function ready. If you had typed this code, it might have taken you a few minutes, but this is within a couple of seconds. You already have the code ready for you. Now let's see whether we can generate a unit test to test the function we have just written with the help of CodeWhisperer. So I'm going to say unit test for, and as you can see, it has actually started once again suggesting um, completion for the comment itself. So it looks good. Yeah, I want to write a unit test for the function I just wrote. Name of the function is load data. I'm going to accept with hitting the tab key. And when I hit enter, it should now generate the function definition first. And as you can see, the function name here is prefixed with test underscore. So it understands the intent and it is actually following the nomenclature as well. Accept the function definition, and I'm going to hit the enter key. Now it should generate the rest of the function. And as you can see, it says loading additional CodeWhisperer recommendations. Right. So sometimes it takes a while to generate all 5 recommendations. But let's see. I'm going to use my arrow keys. Let's see what other recommendations we have. The third one is looks interesting. Uh, the fourth one actually is much better, right? So what it is doing is it's actually loading a CSV file. Now the name of your CSV file may not be example.csv, right? So there is like a little bit of editing you may have to do. Also, in your CSV file, you may have more than 3 rows, right? So when you're actually checking for the shape, you would say correct number of rows is not 3, it is 5. So small things like that you might have to edit. But as you can see, it has actually guessed pretty well what the values should be, right? Once again, if instead of John, your value could be Peter, uh, but it has given you the structure where you have to make small changes and your unit test is ready to go. So this is once again a productivity boost where if you had to write this code yourself, you might have spent like 5 to 10 minutes versus here it is done within 5 seconds. Now let's switch the gears a little bit and let's now take a look at an example of how it generates code for AWS APIs. So what I've done here is, because CodeWhisperer does require a little bit of context, I have imported the Boto3 library. So that tells CodeWhisperer that this is going to be code related to AWS APIs. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply once again write a comment that says function to upload a file to S3 using server side encryption, right? So once again, it has started suggesting the code. I'm going to accept this suggestion because that's what I was trying to do. Um, now it should generate the function signature or the function definition, and it looks good. It actually has a parameter for SSE key. I'm going to accept. Actually, the second one looks better because that's how I would write the name of the parameter. And then I'm going to hit enter. As I hit enter, it should generate the entire function for me. And you can see CodeWhisperer is working on certain things when there would be a small wheel that would be turning at the bottom right of your screen. So good, it has generated the entire function. As you can see, the upload file method of S3 client is It already includes the server-side encryption and the type is KMS. All of it looks good. I can look at other examples, but this is actually what I was looking for. So I'm just going to hit the tab key, right? So with that, it becomes a part of your code. And as you can see, you might have spent, probably 10 minutes looking at this documentation, and trying to find the right method or the right arguments for server-side encryption, right? With CodeWhisperer, it took you less than 5 seconds. So once again, this is where we can save tons of time for the developers, where they don't have to refer to developer forums or documentation anymore for what we call common examples of code or boilerplate code. Now the developer's task becomes more creative, where they would focus on actually solving a business problem, breaking down problems into smaller tasks. And once you break down the problem into smaller and smaller tasks, then CodeWhisperer can actually, based on your task description, it should generate the code for you. Now let's switch the gears a little bit and let's look at a security scan, right? Now what I'm going to do is basically introduce a vulnerability in the code. I'm doing this only for demo purposes. This is not the right way to actually do things with AWS, but I am going to say variables for AWS credentials. Right? So once again, CodeWhisperer is a code completion service, right? So if you nudge it in the wrong direction, it will generate the code for you. So one thing we have done here is, we generate the variable for access key, but as you can see, the actual key is masked with all XXS, right? So the model has learned that access key is probably a pattern of 16 to 20 numbers, and secret key is 32 numbers, and it generates randomly generated numbers for those things. But even then, those access keys can be actually, they can belong to someone even though it is randomly generated. So what we do is we mask these kind of variables or the values of the variables where we think it can expose some sensitive information. So the first thing it has done is, it has at least masked the variable values. So it generates the access key and then it generates the secret key. I will accept both. So what I've done is I have introduced a security issue here, right? So let's run a security scan on this file and see whether CodeWhisperer finds the security issue. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I have the CodeWhisperer menu. I'm just going to say run security scan. Um, it will run the security scan on this open file as well as any dependencies, and it will make sure that it is running the code through multiple security detectors, right? That's why it takes a little bit of time. It should take about 15 to 30 seconds to run the security scan and to notify the user if it finds any security issues. The idea here is, it's not completely real time, but every time you're going to commit the code, maybe it is worth taking those 30 seconds to run the security scan to make sure you don't have any at least commonly known issues in your code. So as we can see here, it has identified one issue, and let's expand on the issue. There you go. It says hard-coded credentials, right? If I click on it, it will take me to the exact location. It will take the cursor to the exact location where this issue can be found. So now the developer is aware that there is an issue with their code and they have to fix it before they commit the code. So this is one benefit of having the features we have under our responsible AI umbrella. Um, we don't want the developer to inadvertently introduce security issues or CodeWhisperer to introduce security issues. We want to make sure that when they're ready to commit the code, the developer can just take 15-20 seconds to run this scan. Now let's also take a look at an example where there could be some licensing implications. The code would be under reference because it is uniquely generated code, and or generated code is unique enough, and it can be found in one of our training data repositories. So I'm going to manually trigger CodeWhisperer here with option C. Now it should generate a function for me, right? And if you're looking at the screen, uh, at the time of generation in the pop-up, it tells me that the reference code could be under MIT license, right? So it is giving me warning right here. If I accept this recommendation, it also tells me when I hover on this code, it tells me that this code could be under MIT license, and this is the repository name DRFS, right? So you should take a look at the repository and the corresponding license and decide whether you want to use it or not. And if you decide to use it, the right thing to do is attribute it at least to the original author, right? Uh, Now, beyond actually showing this pop-up, we also keep a log of everything that should be under reference that has been accepted by the developer. So if you look at the code reference panel, it tells you everything that is under reference in your existing project. So everything that you have accepted that might require attribution or might require you to look at the corresponding license type and the repository is kept as a log for you, so that maybe end of the week you look at everything that you have accepted and provide attributions in your code to all those instances. Now, one other key thing that I would like to mention is in the settings there are a couple of things you can do. The first one here is it says include suggestions with code references, right? So if you're not comfortable with including suggestion with code references, when you can say if there are any licensing implications, for example, the example we just saw, it was under MIT license, the code snippet, right? If there are any licensing implications, I just want them filtered out and never shown to me. So you can simply check this box off where you will not see or receive any recommendations that may have such licensing implications, right? As soon as we detect there is a code reference for this, we'll simply filter it out. The other setting here is for sharing your content with AWS. So I mentioned that the code snippets, right? So to generate a recommendation for you, CodeWhisperer requires a little bit of code context, right? A few lines of your code prior to the cursor. Now, that code can be actually saved as an input output combination, right? So that we can improve our service further. But with a single checkbox, you can say, I don't want to share anything with the AWS. Please do not store my um, code context or my code recommendations, and we will honor that for you, right? So nothing will be shared with AWS. All of your code will be completely private to you. We will simply generate the recommendations for you, and we will make sure that we do not retain either the context or the recommendations. And let's wrap up this webinar. So thank you everyone for attending the webinar. Please, we are in a preview. CodeWhisperer is in a preview right now. You can sign up, you can register for the preview. We'll share the sign up page link with you um, in the chat or in the comments. And we hope that you would consider taking CodeWhisperer for a spin. Thank you.